I was saying is I'm going to I'm going to turn off my screen so that we have enough bandwidth during this session so that you guys can see my screen. If you have any questions, feel free to either ask us in the chat box or to you can unmute yourself as long as you just are respectful of somebody else who's speaking. Meredith is going to monitor our chat box here as well as I will when she's speaking, so that we can just answer those questions as they come along. If you haven't already introduced yourself, we'd appreciate if you'd introduce yourself and what role you have in your district, and then let us know what district and what state you're from. We'd appreciate that. So today we are going to be talking about best practices for inclusive instruction. We really like to be able to share with you some strategies for inclusive practice instruction and what it is, what it means to us, what inclusive instruction means, and then also give you many resources to utilize when you are thinking about beginning the inclusive practice instruction in your building, or if you've already done so, we would hope that that is the case, that you would have some more tools in your toolbox to use as you begin to grow that process. So let's start out with by putting in the chat box, what is inclusive instruction and what does it look like either in your classroom or in your school? You could just share with us in the chat box. We'd appreciate that. What do you think inclusive instruction looks like? Or what does it look like in your district or in your classroom? So giving kids what they need, it may look very different based upon the student, based upon what their needs are and how they need to be included. Students accessing general education classes in a relevant and meaningful way with intentionality. Love it. So another person shared that at their school, students with IEPs participate in general education classrooms. For some, that means that they use content standards, some that are modified curriculum, so it's accessible to their students' level. Great. Making education available and accessible to every student. Good. I think those definitely hit on many things that we'll be talking about today, that things that are the characteristics of what an inclusive instruction could look like. All right, we're going to take a moment here to look at our website. If you've not gone to our Project Success website, if you could do so, you can either now or later, but we would like you to show you where a couple of things are on the website so that you're able to find them. So I'm going to stop sharing for a minute and pull up our website. Okay. So this is our homepage. If you go over just a couple of tabs to resources, if you're an educator, this would be a great place for you to start. If you click on educators underneath the resources, you can find all the resources that we have here to help you in your daily instruction and in your practice. They all are categorized on the left-hand side. And when you open up one of the categories, it's all the resources that are for that area. So for content connectors, today I did 2 sessions on working with content connectors, and we utilize this so that our teachers could pull up the content connectors, the blueprints, and the vertical alignments for our content connectors. If you are an administrator, you might want to start here under resources and go to administrators. And there's a whole same kind of format that we utilize. Left-hand side is the category, and then you click on it and you open it up and it gives you all the resources that are available. For today, we are going to go under the events side, and there's two ways to get to it, but today you can get to us under webinars. Oops, I'm sorry. Go under events today and pull it up here where it says 2020-21 PS webinar. Go to learn more. And for today's webinar, we're November 4th. So the presentation is here for you, as well as all the resources that Meredith and I will be talking about today. They are all linked here so that you can have pull up the resource for yourself as well. They are embedded in the PowerPoint as well. So if you do pull up the presentation, all of our links that will be on the resources we'll be talking about are in here as well. What's nice to see here is we have some upcoming webinars coming up in February and March. All you do here is click to the right and you can register for any of those as well. There's also here a flyer if you wanted to send it out to your teachers to recommend them to be fellow teachers, or if you're a district leader, send those out and you can register. Right. Also, if you click here, register, it also brings you up to be able to register as well. So if you need to contact us, you can just hit on the contact and contact us as well. So we wanted you to be aware of where you can find all of our information and all the resources that we're going to be talking about today. Right. So this is our project success team. We have Meredith, Katie Merck. She'll be on, you heard her a couple minutes ago talking about being in the chat box, and she's going to help present today. She's our director of project success. Amy Howie, many of you might know Amy. Amy is the one that began our project, and she's our advisor. Myself, I'm Heidi Brett Baker, and Ashley are subject matter experts, and we help coach and work with many of the districts throughout the state of Indiana. And then Mary and Christine are our project managers, and they keep us all together. They are organizing and helping us with our website. They've redesigned the beautiful website that we have now with all that information, and they are the ones who correspond with you often when you're registering for something, or to follow up with all of our on-site information. So a little bit about myself. Once again, I told you my name is Heidi Brett Baker. I have been an educator for a long time. I spent the first quarter of my season as an educator in the classroom, working in many different types of classroom, all the way grades K to 12. I then moved on to being a school administrator. I had many different roles as administration, whether it was a building administrator to a district of special ed, to instructional directors in Ohio. When I lived, they were county DDSs that helped run the education program for students with disabilities. Then I moved on to the University of Cincinnati to work on my doctorate, and I created a program for students with intellectual disabilities to go to college and live on campus and work on campus. And then about 2.5 years ago, I joined the project success team here at PCG, and I work on that team as well as PREETS. PREETS is pre-employment transition services for students age 14 to 21, and I help run that project here in Indiana. So that's a little bit about me. I'm going to let Meredith tell you a little bit about her.
Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining today. My name is Meredith. I'm the director of Project Success. I've worked with several of you, and I'm glad that you're able to join today. So just to give you a little bit of my background, I'm fast approaching my 6th year with Public Consulting Group working with Project Success. Spent the before years as a special education teacher and a building administrator as well. Most importantly, those are my kiddos. So we keep the cute ones on the front of the page today. I encourage you, as we work through today, we're going to share lots of resources, and we won't have as much time as we would prefer to go through each one of those resources. So if there's any questions about them, please reach out to any one of our staff member to ask any questions or have them walk you through or host an open office hour to better support your district or your own personal needs as an educator.
Great, thanks. All right, so our agenda for today is we are going to define what inclusive instruction is. We're going to talk about our inclusive practice framework. So we did a summer session this past summer, a 3-week session on what an inclusive practice, and we created a framework and kind of all the steps that go with that framework to really begin implementing inclusive practice in your building or in your classroom. We're then going to move on to some best practice in inclusive instruction. We're going to talk about some key strategies. We're going to talk about grading. Grading comes up often in we're talking about best practices and inclusive practices. You know, what do we do about grading? And so we're going to talk and give you a couple of resources that we've created and worked through that might help you think about that grading process. Then we're going to also like Meredith said, we have many resources that are so available for today's session, and you know, an hour runs fast. And so we do have many examples posted on the website, as well as we'll show you a couple of different versions of them as we wrap up our session today. And then the last thing would be, we always want to give you a plan to think about how can you utilize all the stuff that we talk about in this session, and how can you start that that plan for either your classroom or for your school district. So as you leave today, we really hope that we've been able to talk to you about identifying best practices and instructional strategies for an inclusive setting. We want you to really think about developing a continuum of grading options. And then really, like I talked about, we never want you just to leave without a plan. And we really want you to have a template to start a plan for action, and how that's going to be developed, and how you can utilize all the people and resources in your classroom and in your district to help students in an inclusive setting. So when we think about inclusion, I like this quote: "Inclusion is changing the rules of the game so that everyone can play and everyone can win." And as I was reading some of your guys' responses in the chat, you certainly hit that, right? You really talked about that. We want everybody to be able to play in the classroom. We want everybody to be in the game, and that that would require really thinking about each one of our students as individuals and having them have a sense of belonging, and that we want them to be able to win and be successful in an inclusive setting. So when we're thinking about practices and ways to go about that, we certainly want to keep that in mind. So let's talk about what are inclusive practices anyway. So when you think of that word, I know most people just think of the word inclusion, right? But when we think about it, we really talk about that there's really a very wide range of ways to define inclusive teaching, but some significant ways that we think that are very key points or characteristics would be these on this slide here. We think that it really requires purposeful design, teaching and assessment that is very engaging and meaningful and accessible to all. And those are key words that you guys hit a little bit ago again in the chat. You talked about, we want students to be engaged. You know, inclusion doesn't just mean a place. It really is being engaged, having access to curriculum, and having access to their peers as well. Inclusive practices really is about teaching that incorporates dynamic practices, with being aware of that we have many students who learn in a different way. So really thinking about differentiating our instruction, differentiating the way we present material, the way we expect it to be presented back to us, and the way that we deem that students have learned it, how we gauge their trajectory of their learning. So that is really thinking about teaching that incorporates that. Another key thing, I think some of you talked about this earlier in the chat too. Somebody mentioned about assessment, but using a variety means of assessment to promote students' academic success and well-being. So, you know, paper and pencil is not always the best assessment for somebody. It could be that we're utilizing, you know, presentations. It could be that we're utilizing project-based assessment. It could be talking about that we use more formative assessment than we do summative assessment. it really is using a variety so that we can really see the whole student and how the student is being successful in that setting, and that they are feeling that they belong, and that they are engaged in meaningful presentation of what they're learning. We also think that another key characteristic of inclusive practice is that teaching that attends to students' different social identities and backgrounds. So we want to make sure that everybody, like I said, feels like they belong, and that everybody's needs are being met as much as possible, and that we are aware of those needs, and that we are planning intentionally so that everybody can feel a part of the classroom or the school. And last, it's really thinking about when we design and we teach and we assess our students, that all students are treated fairly, that they are equal, they have equal access to the learning, that everybody's valued, and that most importantly, I think too, is really having those high expectations, and that every student is challenged, and and when they're challenged, we give them the supports they need so that they can be successful. So those are the key characteristics that we think that really resonate with inclusive practices when we talk about that. So what is it all about? When we think about inclusive instruction, what do we aim to do as educators? Well, I think one of the key things is we aim to help that all students feel a sense of belonging, that that students, when they participate in an inclusive practice setting, that they feel part of the community, part of the class, part of the school, that all students are treated equally, despite what needs they have, or support they may need. That we work through their support needs or their accommodation needs or modifications, but everybody has a sense of belonging in that classroom and in the school. We know that inclusive instruction aims to promote collaboration between students. Also, that we think about it as that it's really a collaboration between content teacher, so the grade level teacher, whether it's in the earlier primary age, or in the content, whether it's science or math teacher and the special education teacher, working together to have a good solid partnership, so that so the students can benefit from that partnership, and that the two teachers can guide each other on the necessary instruction for the students in their class. And we certainly know that inclusive instruction aims to meet the students' needs by differentiating instruction, and really thinking about designing our classroom environments differently and flexibly so that students can be successful. And when we think about designing our instruction, that it meets a variety of needs for all of our students. Okay. So inclusive teaching and learning is a mindset. It certainly is a way of thinking and ask how best to create opportunities for all students to connect with you, the course material in each other. So when we started that inclusive practice framework that I talked about from this summer, we really thought about that. Where do we start when we're giving professional development, and we are talking about what an inclusive practice means to us? We know that there has to be a foundational piece. We know that people have to believe in inclusive practice, and we know that that really requires a mind shift for folks to even want to engage in that process. And so that's where we started at really this summer, when we started that inclusive practice framework, was thinking about how do we talk about the key things that have to have a mind shift: high expectations, presumed confidence, least dangerous assumption. And this quote just really talks about that, and to think about that is the starting point, and that is where we need to start, so that students have a sense of belonging and can feel good about participating inclusively. So, being a researcher, and there's many people that, say, why is inclusive practice happen? Why is it good for everybody? Some people it isn't good for. We always want to talk about that research. And I'll tell you what the research says. The research says that, simply put, both students with and without disabilities learn more when they're in an inclusive practice setting. For students with disabilities, their academic gains in literacy, math, and social studies improve drastically compared to being in a self-contained classroom at all times. Both their grades and their standardized tests skills are increasing. Their communication skills increase, as well as, definitely, we know the social impact that it has, that, authentic, lifelong friendships are gained and created when our students engage in inclusive practice settings. Also, the research tells us that if students spend more time in the general education classroom with students without disabilities, that there are fewer absences and there's less behavioral referrals. Also, that students, their peers without disabilities show much more positive attitudes in the inclusive classroom, and that they also make greater gains in reading and math. Oftentimes this happens, right, because they become peer tutors. It's just a natural, automatic thing for our students to want to help each other, and they become that natural peer tutor. And that, we know when students teach each other things, that is helps them learn better, and it's shown in the research. Also, it helps us think about that many times there's people that have some concerns or pitfalls that might that might affect or challenge instruction to be least effective, but that all those findings that people say or talk about, when they do the actual research findings, this is not the case. That is not the case of what happens for students. It's quite the opposite. So what are the benefits? The benefits that when we utilize inclusive instruction allows us to begin, we have an individual starting point for instruction, right? It allows us for students to begin learning where they're at. It allows students to work with appropriately challenging tasks. So we are challenging them. We're giving them access to the general education curriculum, and we are challenging them and presuming that they're confident and allowing for that. It allows us for reinforcement or extension of concepts that are based upon student readiness. So we're helping them by being exposed to that grade level access again, and then helping them learn that vocabulary, learn those concepts in the classroom, whereas that sometimes in the self-contained classroom, that's not the case. Inclusive instruction also allows us to modify working conditions based upon each student's learning needs, so that differentiation happens often in an inclusive classroom. It also allows for success, and when the students feel that successful, it helps them be much more motivated and wanting to learn and wanting to be more successful in their classroom setting. Okay. The key is inclusion works when students believe that all children can learn. So all children are valuable members of our school, of our classroom, and that all children can learn.
All right, so what we're going to think through next is the inclusive framework. And as Heidi mentioned earlier, this inclusive framework was developed by the Project Success team this summer for part of our 2020 Summer Institute around building inclusive practices. And so we're going ahead and show you that framework, and we want to talk through this framework on how you can consistently be thinking about where you and your school lies within this framework, and know that we're constantly moving forward. So whether you've been implementing inclusive practices for years, or whether you're just looking to expand your inclusive practices, or if this is new to you and you're just getting started, this framework is a structured step-by-step way to implement and think through how you can work through each one of these inclusive steps. So it starts with establishing that need for change. And once that has been established, we really want to get the right group together. And you know the importance of that. Having the right members on your team who value inclusive practices and can help work collaboratively towards creating that vision. And that vision is so important because it helps keep us anchored to our day to day. Creating that vision, making sure that we have each one of those elements organized. It captures what each individual believes, and it anchors our work so that we can share that vision with each member, not only of our team, our inclusive team, but also within each member of our school as a whole. So leveraging that during practicing learning groups or your PLC time. Anytime you have a staff meeting, leveraging that vision to think big and have those smaller steps to help get you there. That's a common statement that we repeat repeatedly with Project Success, is that we want to start small and think big. And creating that vision statement, building that inclusive team, and then sharing that vision helps us take those small steps towards that larger action plan. With that, and equally as important as having that vision, is celebrating those wins, as we can encourage small wins equal bigger steps. So we want to encourage any time that we've accomplished even a small component, or even if a student within a classroom makes one small gain, we want to celebrate that and go back to where it fits within our vision statement as an inclusive community. And then we always want to reflect and analyze and adjust where we are with our processes. So taking stock of what has gone well, what we hasn't gone well, equally as important, and then what hasn't happened at all, so that we can start to build in some action steps to help accomplish those areas as well. And then eventually, the more we start to secure those small wins and they begin to build up, the more it becomes a norm, not only in our classroom, but then it starts to transition across the building and within the school learning environment. So let's just take a quick moment. I'm going to pull up a poll really quickly.
You think you're poopy.
Or maybe I won't. If not, we will put it in the chat box. It looks like I am logged out. So what we will do here with this question, since I can't access the poll, what I'd like you to do is just go ahead and add this within the chat box. So where is your school within the inclusive practices framework? And your options fall within each element of the inclusive framework. So everything for the need for change, all the way down to you're setting the norm, everyone's starting to embrace these practices. And it doesn't matter where you lie within the framework, because each individual will be moving forward from that level. So if you could just, in the chat box, just go on ahead and reflect where your school, or maybe it's even your classroom, is within this inclusive framework. Are you at the need for change? Are you creating the vision? Are you still gathering up your team? So Tammy says we're in the take action statement.
Yeah.
Yes, perfect.
Well, let me get Audrey down real quick, and then.
Can you guys just, if you could mute a little, somebody who's kind of just having something going on in the background, we'd appreciate it. Thank you.
The other, Diana said we're creating a shared vision. Excellent. And we know that shared vision is where we work off of, and that's how we build that foundation for the larger group. So having already established that team, pulling together and starting to look through that shared vision to work from. Excellent. Thank you, both Tammy and Diana. We will continue to keep the chat box open so that you're able to share throughout this time. I see Rebecca said the need for change and gathering that team. Absolutely. Building those foundational pieces is so essential, and making sure that you have the right team prepared is so important. So we'll continue to, Heidi will be in the chat box. So if you have any questions or want to reflect on where you are, I think we will keep that open. So once we've started to think through that inclusive framework, and you reflected on where your school or even your classroom within your collaborative team may lie within that, this template helps you begin to think through what's currently working in your classroom, your school, or your district, and what is not. And it really encourages you to think through the main components or those current practices within the inclusive framework. So in the left-hand column, you'll see our current practices, everything from developing that inclusive mindset, working towards that inclusive vision, and then the celebration of progress, setting those small wins, all the way down to the inclusive norms. It allows you to reflect on current practices happening. What are you observing? What are you seeing? Whether it's in your own classroom, whether it's you're walking through a classroom and you're observing a specific grade level, and then what changes need to take place to meet the vision. What are those adjustments that we need to see? It could be scheduling, it could be some professional development that we need to think through. It could even be lesson planning, beginning from that foundation of universal design. And then most importantly, what additional support is needed and who can help provide that support. So it might be a local leader in the school that can help provide that support, or it may be one of the Indiana resource centers that can help provide that information. It's really important to continually go back to this current practices form and really take some time to assess where you are throughout the process, and then see what changes need to take place and who can help support you through the process. It's you're not alone in having to find those supports to help you with your goals.
Yeah.
So,
Meredith, I want to just, somebody in the chat had asked about how do you start that? What is the suggestion? I would want to say that on our website, you can go to here and listen to the inclusive framework practice that we did this past summer. There's an engagement guide that goes with it, as well as a facilitator's guide. So you might want to look at that if you are the one that's going to be leading the charge in your district, and maybe use those and the templates within those to really help start guiding that team.
Yeah, that's an excellent point. Ashley Quick, who's on this call right now, actually wrote out every single verbatim what you would need if you're a leader and you're walking your team through this process. Everything that you would need, from flip to this slide, speak to this, use this resource. So I encourage you to go to the facilitator guide as well. And after we finish up, we'll drop that link in the chat box to where you can find that. All right, so let's go ahead and let's reflect a little bit on where what supports are really needed. So let's think through, and I think it's so important as we think through what supports do you need in implementing this inclusive framework. That statement down on the bottom. So to implement the inclusive practices framework means you're challenging that status quo. So really having to identify what that need for change is and being honest about where we are in the process. Removing any curriculum barriers, really thinking through universal design for learning, and then presenting those goals that align with that. How are we going to engage all of our learners and serve students in a really equitable way? So if you could just kind of reflect for a minute, and we'll leave the chat box open, but what supports do you need in implementing the inclusive practices framework? If you're a teacher, is it leadership support? If you're an administrator, is it establishing that team? Tamara had mentioned training. And thank you to Ashley. Ashley dropped the facilitator guides directly into the chat box. And Project Success would be happy to support any district that needs some inclusive practices training here in Indiana as well. Leadership support, excellent. Developing and finding your leaders to help support that is an essential element, is making sure that you have those people that lead, have access to the schedule, have access to the ability to look at the PLC groups, those learning community groups. And Tammy said it starts at the top. Absolutely, we want to think about how we embrace that. Diana said time with general education staff, not so many demands on teachers' plate at once. So we're freed up to tackle this together. That's a really excellent point. And we'll continue to explore this during our summer institutes so that that sometimes that helps to kind of free up the yearly schedules and look at how we establish those teams. But you're absolutely right, that schedule is essential in all areas. All right, for the sake of time, I'm going to continue to move forward, but continue to reflect and think through what that looks like and what supports you might need. And don't hesitate to reach out to any one of us to help support that, that process for you. When we're thinking through inclusive instruction, we really need to think through where we want to start. And that really boils down to some key elements. We're going to think through growth mindset. We're going to think through universal design for learning, differentiated instruction, individualized learning strategies, and universal supports as kind of those foundational pieces along and within the process. So let's go back to the chat box for just a minute. And I think it's good to kind of see where, not only where you are within the inclusive framework, but which one of your inclusive practices do you already observe in your practice. So we can just type this out. You may be a teacher who really embraces growth mindset and that we're moving students forward and that we're building that stamina to think positively about what the next step is versus that right from wrong. Or maybe you're building the foundation from inclusive planning using UDL. So if you could just take a moment to really think through, and it may be more than one, which practices you already observe in your classroom, or if you're an administrator, what are you observing more as you're doing walkthroughs and helping support teachers? All right, so Diana said differentiated instruction and growth mindset. Perfect. Growth mindset, UDL, and DI. So differentiated instruction. Thank you, Rebecca. It's always good. It's always best practice to sit down and think through where you are currently in your processes, which are currently embraced, and then which areas do we need to really move forward with. Individualized learning strategies and differentiated instruction. Thank you, Kelly. All right, we'll leave this open and Heidi will be in the chat box for you. So when we're thinking through, I'm going to break these down slightly, and it sounds like we have some foundational knowledge on many of these concepts, but I'm going to touch briefly on each one, and then I want to just speak to this tool that's linked on your slide here. So as we think through inclusive instruction, we really want to assure that we're teaching and or observing growth mindset, UDL, all the way down through those universal supports. So when we're thinking growth mindset, we're really thinking on how students face challenges and setbacks. And we want to help build students with a growth mindset that believes that their abilities can improve over time. That although they didn't get it the first time, we can build upon that. And it's not all or none. We can look for those small wins in our students' instruction. We can look for those small wins and be specific at giving feedback to what those wins are, so that we can encourage what the next step would be. And really keeping it about the effort that students are making, not necessarily always that result, but how they're putting forth the effort to help achieve that, so that we can build that stamina to continue to work towards that goal. Universal design for learning is one of my favorite elements, because I believe as we build proactive plans that address student need from the framework, we address all students, not just students with disabilities. So as we're thinking about UDL, or Universal Design for Learning, which is that framework created by CAST, we're able to think through how we design learning experiences to proactively meet the needs of students. All students, not just students with disabilities. So we're thinking through engagement. What are those elements to help hook and engage our learners? What and how can we show representation so that we can be showing multiple modalities of how we present the information as educators and leaders. And then lastly, how we can allow students to express and show what they know. and get out of the box of learning where we have to do a written response, or we have to do some specific project. We can provide multiple representations of how students are able to express themselves and show what they know. The other element, and I'll just touch briefly on them, as we look at differentiated instruction and individualized learning strategies, all fit within what does it look like in your classroom. So it begins with mindset, always. The idea of we're presuming competence as a foundational concept, that every student should be provided with the chance to learn alongside their peers without having to prove anything. They have that right to work equitably beside their peers, to learn and have that right, to have access to general education curriculum or align to that curriculum. As I mentioned, universal design for learning and instruction, we want to make sure that the curriculum is accessible and that we're building a variety of backgrounds and learning styles into our instruction. So if a student is a kinesthetic learner and they learn best from movement, we've built that in, as well as for our visual students, we've built in visuals and cues throughout the lesson. And also for our auditorial learners, we have an option for them to listen and retell the content back to us. And then of course that differentiated instruction, which is always that foundational piece of utilizing that flexible grouping, making sure that we've built in those learning styles that goes back to universal design for learning. And then creating alternate activities. We want students to be working towards a common objective. How they get there and show what they know can be through multiple modalities. So I think that's really important to think through. And then lastly, what does inclusive instruction look like? And what are some of those elements that we can be implementing day to day, time to time, to help support that? So we're going to be looking at graphic organizers. We're going to be looking at how we build independence with an I do, we do, and you do approach. So the teacher model through practice and then individual practice. And then we're going to be thinking through how do we activate some learning strategies into our day-to-day instruction. So something like think, pair, share, when we work on recall and understanding of new content, where our students are able to think it through, pair up, and then share what they've learned. And each one of these strategies align directly to what inclusive instruction should look like in instruction. And then last but not least, as we're thinking about what inclusive instruction looks like, we're going to be thinking through universal supports are for everyone. So you don't have to have a student who is specifically identified as having a disability. These are core elements that we're building into our instruction, and they're core elements that we are building into our curriculums. And it fits around some key components. So we want to build rapport with students. We want students to know those clear expectations from the moment that we address the learning objective and weaving that throughout our instruction. And then, of course, we want to make sure that we're reinforcing what we want to see. So reinforcing that desired behavior. And those are really key elements and simple strategies that we can be using to fuse into our day-to-day instruction and our day-to-day classrooms as well. All right, I'm going to pass the mic over to Heidi to show just a couple of examples, and then we'll fuse in some grading.
All right. All right. Well, we definitely want to be mindful of time. And like we told you from the beginning, that there are a lot of different resources and different templates that we've created for thinking about how to differentiate instruction, how to use different examples for lessons of different variations. So we're going to show you a couple here, but I'm not going to go through very detailed because you'll be able to pull it up and they're all listed on the website. But I just want to talk through a couple. So the first one here is a variation of content, and why I really want to show you this one is that we created a template where it's utilizing the content connectors as well as the academic standards, showing how that you can take that key concept of the academic standard and unpack it. And so if you look on our website, I did do the unpacking template that aligns with both these two examples. So unpack it and how it aligns to the standard. And then based upon that, looking at what can happen for each student. For student A, this is what would be happen when we're thinking about, if you've never looked at our unpacking template, the barriers or the challenges that they would see to be able to show growth towards this academic standard or this content connector. What would it be for student B, and what would it be for student C? So there's an example for this kindergarten standard, and there's also an example for a second grade standard, and the unpacked standard template example is there as well. There's this example on the website, as well as there's a blank one so that you can create it for yourself as well. But this is a variation in content for if something that you could work with collaboratively with the general education teacher and the special education teacher to work on a standard that the whole class is working on. Then, oops. Another one that we created for thinking about the different when you're using UDL, and you're thinking about the differentiating content, product, and process. We created another template to think about. It's a topic. You complete the chart using the topic of what you'll be teaching. Put your grade level in, and then there's a content section, a product section, and a process section where you can break it down for each tier of student A, student B, and student C. And once again, there's an example on the website like this one finished, as well as there's a blank one so that you can create one for your students as well. And then another one that we worked on was differentiating and tier chart when you're thinking about considerations for different learners. So really thinking about what range of needs you have for a wide range of students in your class, what the students already know, what they understand, and what they should be able to do. Think about what that starting point is. How do you hook your students in? How do you engage them? And then think about, again, student A, student B, and student C. What would it look like for them to present to you that they have knowledge of that topic area? So this, again, too, is on the website. And I want to not really necessarily hurry through, but I do want to be aware of your time. And I want to spend a couple of minutes on the grading section. So I want to go ahead and move on. So I get asked all the time when we're thinking about an inclusive practice, what happens really about grading. And as you can see, Meredith is putting all those resources in the chat box as well for you. But when we're thinking about grading, what happens when a student goes into an inclusive practice? And when I think about grading, we think about that grades should be accurate. The grades have to be meaningful for students. They definitely need to be consistent. And they definitely need to support the learning process. So it's not an evaluation where we're just giving them a final grade or final verdict. It's really about supporting that learning process of helping them think about the process and along the way. It needs to be very well defined and documented. And what I mean by defined and documented is when you are thinking about having a student in an inclusive practice or working in an inclusive classroom, the teachers that are involved, whether it be the content teacher and the special educator, you both need to come up with a clearly defined goal or goals for students in the inclusive setting. You want to be able to state what the grades should look like, whether you're going to be utilizing letter grades, number grades, or pass or fail. But that needs to be all established and defined ahead of time. It also should be documented so that the students know what they're working towards, parents know what the students are working for, and as far as grades, and then so that you and the teacher are on the same page when thinking about that. So teachers use information typically from 3 domains when we're determining grades in an inclusive practice setting. We use from the students' products. That could be a wide range of different examples. Here we just talked about maybe reports, projects, written work, assessments. It could be, you know, a PowerPoint. It could be an observation. It could be an oral presentation. But a wide range of student products can be utilized to think about grading. Students really could also think about getting grades for their active participation or that their academic behavior in the classroom. So if you're working on students just gaining the ability to focus and be able to have access to the classroom, their grades might be on their responsibility of, you know, being prepared, following their checklist, doing the giving the best effort forward, being engaged at all times, having good working habits. And last and most importantly, I think is what shows student progress. And so by setting goals ahead of time, what you and the content teacher would like for your students to gain in this inclusive practice is best, because then you can measure the goals, measure the students' progress by measuring it up towards those goals. So, you know, it could be that you're going into an inclusive setting to really look about adding more vocabulary to the student's language. So that's going to be something that you're going to then look at each time you give some type of assessment, how they're progressing towards that goal. But I would definitely charge you that when students start that process, that you as the teachers work collaboratively together to set and define these grading policies ahead of time so that everybody is on the same page and everybody knows that process. This is a template that we created to help you think about goals and help you think about the accommodations and modifications that are needed when you go into an inclusive practice setting. So this is again linked to the website, but it starts off with what are the students' strengths, what are the students' interests, what are their learning preferences, how do they best present. All this, these guiding questions and some assessments and some inventories that you can utilize to help answer these questions are listed embedded right within this template for them to utilize. And I also, if it's somebody that you've worked with for a long time and you didn't want to go through this full process of this template, we also created a very short form, just so, like I said, it's all about making sure that you define it ahead of time and you write it down and are intentional about it so that everybody's on the same page when a student goes into an inclusive setting. This here just has the student's name, the teachers who are involved, what the course is, some strength of the student, what accommodations and modifications are needed, and then once again, what type of grade you'll be giving, whether that's going to be a letter grade or a pass or fail. This template too is on our website as well. So I'm going to go ahead and skip that next question about what strategies you are going to share with your peers. I hope you share with many of them and that you start to utilize them. But the important thing, like I told you, is we never want to leave one of our webinars or our PDs without thinking about a plan. And so just like we used in our framework, our inclusive framework to create an action plan about implementing an inclusive strategies practice into our daily classroom and school, we've created a template to help you create an action plan to how to think about inclusive instruction. So start with defining that problem, collect and analyze data, develop a plan, implement that plan, evaluate it often. You know, you definitely need to reflect and analyze and adjust it, and then revise the plan as needed. It is here again on the website as well. This is what it would look like. What are some practices that are happening? Are they currently happening? Do you want them to start happening? What are some action steps that you could utilize to get them going? Who are the people that are responsible? Make sure you always start a timeline, to have a timeline when you're going to start it, when you want it to be ended. And then make sure you, like Meredith talked about in that framework, make sure you definitely talk about those small wins and celebrate those small wins, because those small wins really help that momentum going. We know that the inclusive practice is a lengthy process, and we want you to be encouraged by it and celebrate as you go along the practice, the practice of implementing it into your classroom. So I'm sorry that, our session is only an hour and it really has come to an end. And so, we've talked about where inclusive practices happen, why it's important, really have that growth mindset and thinking about that it is. So every student has a sense of belonging and valued, and that all students have access to the curriculum. And then we give you some strategies along the way and many resources. So we hope you enjoyed the session. We would ask that you fill out our session evaluation before you leave. We really do value your feedback. We always read them, each and every one of them, and want to always be supportive of you as teachers and administrators to help best you serve students. So if you have any questions, we'll stay on because I know we wrapped up really quickly at the end, but before you leave us, if you could take time to fill out that evaluation, we'd really appreciate it. And I'll stay on, like I said, for questions.
And Heidi already mentioned this, but if this is something you're looking at locally, this was a bit of a teaser within the hour with so many great templates and tools to help build your toolkit. But if you want to work through this process with a project success team member, please reach out to us and we'll make sure our website is again in the chat box along with that evaluation. So thank you guys.